Hey guys, welcome back to this channel. Now, I wanted to make a video originally about the countries that you should leave by the age of 2030 if you're a young person. Now, I didn't go through and make that video because it was just a bit too negative, and I thought, it might be a bit better if I give some more solid advice about what you should do rather than what you should avoid. And I do think you should leave your country if you are in some of the grouping of countries that are currently in decline right now. But I'm going to give you a few suggestions and a few tools that you can use that'll help you transition into a life abroad. But first, what are those countries that I mentioned that you should leave by 2030 if you're a person, say, like in his early 20s to like 30 into early 30s, right? So I'm just going to list them off. First, I think Australia, UK, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, and Korea. But considering that most people that are watching my video probably listening to it in English, I'm assuming you're mostly from the Western world. So for those of you who are in Australia, UK, Canada, Western Europe, I don't really have to explain more. I was going to make like a video showing like a montage of all the crazy stuff that you can see going on in our countries. But I think you've been black-pilled and demoralized enough to know that what I'm saying is factually correct. Like, our societies are clearly in decline, and if you're young, then you're getting the short end of the stick, to say the least. Now, what can you do if you are trapped in this world? Because one of the hard things about, being in this situation is that if you're not making a lot of additional income, it's hard to make moves beyond sustaining your current situation. So the problem is that you essentially live to work, right? So you get income from your job, but then you use the income from your job to pay for rent that is nearby where you live, and then you pay for food to sustain yourself whilst you're at work. And a lot of people are in debt, and things are so expensive that you're not really having an additional money pipeline going into something else, helping you try and find some alternative stream of income, or try and find some plan. That's the really hard thing about being here, is that for as long as you're in this wage slave conditioning, it's very hard to create an alternative to it. And that's why I'm such a big advocate of moving abroad. And you may say, well, that seems unreasonable because you don't have money to be able to sustain a lifestyle like that. But you've got to understand, this wage slave cycle is a chicken and egg thing. The more time poor you have, the less time you have to find a way to break out of that. So you've got to try and do everything you can to jump to an alternative lifestyle in which you aren't trading all of your time for money. And a big way of doing that is you've got to go to a place that is just dramatically cheaper. And I'm going to give you a few tips, but I'm going to go with my first example here to show you what can be possible. So actually, it's not this one here, it's actually here, Cebu. Now, the reason why I mention this first is just because I can give you a personal anecdote about what I personally did when I was young. And I get it, like, I'm 30 years old now, which for people that are like 20 is like, I'm basically like a boomer to you guys. Like, I actually get to say, back in my day, things weren't totally messed up, and you could actually do things, society wasn't completely destroyed. So I understand, I'm sorry for sounding like such a boomer, but what I did when I was young was when I was like 20, ever since I got out of high school, I was trying to do some kind of business activity. And I wasn't trying to make tons of money. I was just trying to get financially independent, where even if I wasn't making a ton of money, at least it would be my own money and no one would tell me what to do, because I've just got like, I don't know, I just don't like people telling me what to do. I just don't fit well in this kind of environment. So that was my biggest goal, just to be able to have my own money. And, I started doing well with this thing called drop shipping back in the day. You may have heard of it, Back in the day, it wasn't so popular. Back then, it was like a really niche thing, right? And now everyone knows about drop shipping. But back in like 2013, it was a very strange thing. And I wasn't making tons of money off it. I had like this nice little upsend, like when it came to my business activities for the first couple of months, and then it petered out. In the end, I was only making like $200-300 a week, but it was enough to I was living on my own, like in Sydney where I grew up, and life was pretty good. I wasn't saving any money, but I was able to live life on my own terms, and it was good. And later on, for reasons I won't go into now, I actually moved to the Philippines, and there I was actually able to like really live. I could do anything I wanted with like $200-300 a week. And, I was even able to save some money, not by, a lot of money, right? Like I'm able to save like 70 to 150 bucks a week, when I'm living in the Philippines. And, over time it adds up, only if you're living in the Philippines, not if you're anywhere else. But the point of the story that I want to get to is that because this dropshipping stuff, I only did it like, 1 or 2 hours a day, and I was only making like a couple of $100 a week, the point is that I had time. And with that time, I was able to invest that time into other things. So I was able to plan my next move in life. So at the time, I was really serious about studying Mandarin. I've been studying Mandarin since I was 18. But at this stage in my life, I became like absolutely dedicated to it. I devoted like all my time to just studying Mandarin. And then over time, this became like an important skill of my life that allowed me to continue to develop and get to the next stage. And then I could get into the next income stream and to the next thing in life, etc. Now, if I didn't have this little income stream where I was only making a couple of $100 a week, it wasn't fancy or anything, but it was enough to just get me free time. So if I was back in Sydney just working a full-time job, I would not have had enough time to plan for the next move and go to something else. So one of my big recommendations is maybe you want to save up some money and then go to a place that's really cheap to stay, like the Philippines, like Cebu, as I'll talk a bit more about Cebu in a moment. And you go there and you just, you're going to have to be going to the local market like everyone else is. You're going to have to be riding a jeepney, which is a really cheap form of transport. You're going to have to be haggling with people. You want to save all your money. And then with that, you've got this free time. And what are you going to do with that time? You're going to find some way to create a sustainable existence outside of your own country, which means you're going to have to find some way to make money online or in that country that you're staying in, right? So just a number of things off the bat, there's different kinds of online businesses you can do, freelancing work. I mean, there's so many different things to mention, right? If you've got enough time, you can figure it out. Or maybe use that time to study, right? Maybe it's not something specifically you're doing to make money, but maybe using that time to study. And, during that time while you're studying, you're not like, burning the candle at both ends because you've got to work, right? Like if you're working full time in a place like Sydney, it's very hard to, study. I know people do it and they might say, don't be a wuss, but it's hard to do that. It's hard to, I think if you want to try and change your life, and go into something else, it requires it's a full-time effort. If you want to get into some new business, some new activity, you need time. So to my recommendation, going to Cebu is good. Well, out of all my recommendations, Philippines is just the cheapest option if you want to move out of the country, right? Let's just look through some of the statistics so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm using Sydney. You want to go to a website called numbeo.com. And you can basically compare two cities. Now, I've put in Sydney because that's where I'm originally from. I don't really live here anymore. But I put it in here just for reference, and you can see the second line here is the most important. Cost of living, including rent, in Cebu is 63% lower than in Sydney. And by the way, I think it's even cheaper depending on how you want to live your life. I lived pretty large when I was there, so 63% is about right. But if you want to save even more, say on rent, like maybe you do share house in the Philippines, or maybe you live in not such a downtown area. You can save a lot of money if you're cooking your own food. Eating out at restaurants. You can cut that number down rather significantly. And with all that time that you're saving, you then have to just try and lily-frog to the next thing. Use that time to study, use that time to focus on some business, or maybe it's something that you could do in the Philippines. I'm not sure. Now, the next recommendation here is Bangkok. Now, Bangkok is more expensive than Thailand in general is more expensive than the Philippines, but not that much. Thailand is still technically a third world country, but it's moving out of that quite quickly. I think Thailand is developing at quite a rapid rate. And the reason why I like Thailand as an option to move to so much is just because when you're there, you're going to find that you're not alone. There are so many, I like to say disaffected people, young people in particular, from around the world that are just choosing to make Thailand their home for reasons that we're discussing. The cost of living is too high in their own country and they just want to get out. That's one grouping of people. And then you've just got, successful digital nomads. Then you've got like the tourists, the different kinds of tourists, wink, wink, if you know what I mean. But look, there's so many foreigners there, and they're all there for different reasons, right? But it's really good to know that when you go to this foreign country, where English isn't the main language, you can find people that are similar to you, because one of the big problems that you'll encounter when you are trying to move overseas to a cheap country, when you are trying to become a digital nomad, is that you're just going to get lonely, because like the Philippines, yeah, sure, everyone speaks English, which by the way was a recommendation I should have pointed out before. People speak English in the Philippines, but you'll find that unlike Thailand, there aren't really that many people doing what you're doing. You'll get like older men that are married to Filipino wives, but if you're young, you're probably not going to hang out with them. That's why I think Thailand's good, because you'll find a lot of people in their 20s, in their 30s, they're entrepreneurial, they're driven, they're ambitious, and they've all probably decided to leave their countries as well and seek their fortune somewhere else where things might be a bit better. So that's why I think Thailand is good. It's really important you're able to find friends and meet like-minded people. And as I mentioned, what's really awesome is that because there's a number of them there, it's not just that you can find friends, it's just there's also going to be opportunities, because in a way you've got like this little foreigner enclave in which a little ecosystem can develop. So people can create businesses within this little network. You can sell different services to the people that you're around, and that's something that you can do. And another thing that I want to mention with all these recommendations, when I think about it, just like a very easy way to get your foot into the door of another country, especially if you don't have any skills, is just to teach English. Now, teaching English varies on the place that you can go to. There's different tiers of it. Like right now, number one for teaching English is in China. China, like, you can make a lot of money. I haven't put it on this list per se, but like if you're interested in just teaching English, the number one, like the most amount of money you can make doing it right now is in China, followed by Korea, followed by Japan. If you do it in Japan, you will make money, but you will be broke doing it. Southeast Asia is kind of like the lowest tier of doing it. Like you really won't get paid much money. But if you're really desperate to leave your country and just kind of leave it all behind and have an easy way of getting a visa and knowing people and having a network and having, at least enough money to pay for rent and for food, English teaching is a really good way of doing it. So for all these countries that I recommend, if you've got no options, check out English teaching. I think it's good. So next one is Mexico City. Mexico City, there's a few reasons why I like it, but the reason why I think this might be relevant to a lot of you is that if you're lucky enough to have a work from home situation, then what you can do is you can go to Mexico because it's in the same time zone. And it's also not really far away from America. So if you are watching this from America, this is going to be much more useful to you than, say, if you're from Australia, right? So you can work in the same time zone as the company that you're currently working for. And if you're in Europe, then the time zone isn't so dramatically different. Like the difference in the Atlantic time zone, it's not enormous. So Mexico City is really popular for digital nomads. Similar to Thailand, there's a lot of expats there. Like it looks like America is kind of creating a bit of a colony in Mexico City. There's just so many there. And as I mentioned, it just helps with the loneliness. Like you really don't want to be doing this stuff completely on your own. It's just great to have people that are from a similar culture to you. They speak the same language. You can help each other out. You can have friends. You can have relationships, because it's not certain that you really want to go in the deep end. If you want to go in the deep end, that's fine. If you want to learn, Spanish fluently and only hang out with other Mexican people, that's completely fine. But for a lot of you watching, I think it's just generally going to be better to hang out with people similar to you, especially if this is going to be your new home. If you're on holiday, it's one thing to spend like 3 months completely immersed, but if you're going to spend like 5 years plus there, you're going to get kind of homesick. So Mexico City is good for that. And another thing about Mexico City, and this is the case for a lot of the cities that are on this list, is that it's got a very young population. And in the video that I was going to make about the countries that you should leave by 2030, one of them was Korea. And the reason why is because they've got this massive demographic decline where there's just more and more old people and fewer young people. But most people can't visualize exactly what it's like to live in a society where everyone's old. And I have this experience a number of times when I was living in China, and I go to some very small village out in the middle of nowhere, and everyone is basically over the age of 60. It's like an open-air retirement home. And what you'll feel is there's just kind of a misery in the air. Like, you know, the young have died and the old have lingered on. There's no creativity. There's no spark. There's no atmosphere. There's no vibe in the air. It's a sterile kind of environment. And the thing what you have to understand about young people is that they bring flavor, because when you're young, you're a blank slate. You've got so much to prove. You've got a chip in your shoulder because you've got nothing going on. You tend to be broke. You don't really have an education yet. Not so much. You don't really have experience. You don't have a network. You don't have a house. You probably don't have a girlfriend, and you're horny and you're frustrated. All these different things. And then what does a young man do presented with a situation? He goes, tries things. You know, he goes and does stuff. He tries things for the first time. He pushes himself, you know. He tries to go into business. He goes into some new work. He tries to educate himself, tries to create art. All these different things. So when you find that, like, the best athletes, right, they're in that position because physically they're young and they can endure the stress of it, but also they've got a lot to prove, right? The best musicians, like when they come out, they're like in their 20s, they might even be in their late teens, right? The best of culture has to offer comes from young people. And when you find that everyone is just old, things just kind of get worse, right? So my image of what Korea would be like now compared to, say, 5 years from now in 2030 is everything is going to be the same, but just a little worse, right? There's a poem by T.S. Eliot called Hollow Men, and it's, in a way, kind of describes the end of the world, but in a very subtle way. Just imagine it kind of like everything's the same, except you just make a little less money. Everyone else makes a little less money too. Everyone just has a little bit less time for each other. People are just a little bit less kind to each other and are just a little bit more impatient. Imagine just like movies, just they become a little bit worse, right? Just imagine like every single aspect of society. Imagine there's like 1,000 different angles, you know, of society, right? And each of them just degrades ever so slightly, like year after year. And then what you're going to find if you're in Korea, it's like, you know what? It's like, I just noticed the movies aren't as good as they were before. You know what? Like the K-pop idols, they're a little more generic. They're a little less creative. They're a little less interesting as they were before. You know, the dramas, I mean, they're okay, but like they're getting a little worse. You know, like I go to this restaurant, the food quality there is just a little less. You know, it's just a little less businesses. You know, like I have like a little less friends. You know, like it's a little bit harder to find a girlfriend. Like things like that stack up. So going back to Mexico City, it's just a young city, right? So when I was there, it just struck me, but when I was walking around, I'm like, the first time I've seen just the average age of a person was like 25 or 26, so maybe everyone just looked young, but it was just kind of amazing to see a bunch of people that were my age. It was kind of like I was walking through downtown Mexico City, and I'm like, it feels like a university campus, which is kind of cool. And then what do I see everywhere? There's kind of like an energy that's in the air. It's a vibe. It's an unmistakable vibe of young people. You walk through the street, and there's people doing street performances. There's people doing all kinds of art on the street. You find little like people, like stalls of people just trying to sell stuff, trying to hustle their way through. It's alive, it's energetic, and it's beautiful. And that's one reason why I liked Mexico City. It was just an alive city, a lot of young people. A similar thing can be said for other cities as well. But yeah, that's just one thing. I kind of went on a bit of a rant about that. I just thought it's important to think about, like, what is society going to look like when everyone gets old? Because that's one of the big problems of this day and age, right? Like, everyone's getting older, no one's having kids. What does that actually look like? As I mentioned, just things get worse. There's just less color, right? Things are just a little more gray. Next suggestion is Kuala Lumpur. Now, the reason why I recommend Kuala Lumpur is that, just being real, like, a lot of people aren't really aware of what's going on in other countries, like decline or whether it's going up. And Malaysia's just been on the upswing for quite some time. And many of you may have not noticed that Kuala Lumpur is a full-fledged developed nation. And it's probably been that way for like 20 odd years, but it's been building up for quite a while. It's a developed country. But cost-wise, it doesn't really feel like that. I mean, it still feels like you're in Southeast Asia. Like it's more expensive than Thailand. It's more expensive than the Philippines. But for a first world country, I mean, it just does not get cheaper than that. I mean, cost of living, including rent in Kuala Lumpur, is 60% lower than Sydney. Now, I'll be honest, I think Sydney is a more beautiful city. I love Sydney, but 60% lower to still remain in a first world country is a big deal. Now, I'm kind of going up through my suggestions in tiers. So like my first suggestion going to Cebu is kind of like, if you're really, really broke and you just want to get out of your country, then I reckon you should go to the Philippines. Not even just Cebu. You can even go to find some, if you're more adventurous, go to some smaller city, right? And I'm going further up my list, and Kuala Lumpur is like, you need to have a bit more money than than if you were living in Cebu, but like you don't need that much more money. I mean, you could have a very, very comfortable life on like, I don't know, 350 Australian dollars a week. I don't know what it is in American, maybe like 300 USD a week. I reckon you could have a very good life, have a nice big house, you could do whatever you want in Kuala Lumpur. And for those in Malaysia saying, oh, like, maybe not in Kuala Lumpur, at least in other places in Malaysia, you can have a very comfortable life. You can have first world amenities, great infrastructure, fantastic infrastructure. And it's just kind of slept on. Like, a lot of people don't really think about Malaysia at all, right? So don't sleep on Malaysia. I think it's a great place. And by the way, as well, another suggestion about Malaysia, like something that's also occurred to me is that, like, if you want to settle down and have a family, if you might be young now and not thinking about that, but if you did want to have a family, there's reasons why some of my other suggestions might not be so good. Like Cebu, Philippines, it's just a bit too third world. And if you grew up in the first world, you might feel it's a bit unfair to, have your kid be raised in a third world country. I think Bangkok is not too bad. I think Bangkok's all right. Mexico City, you might find that, it might be just a bit too dangerous. Like, if you're able to live right downtown, that's fine. But when you've got kids, you're just going to be a bit more worried. I would say that the best recommendation for, like, if you get to that point where you want to move overseas, raise kids, stuff like that, Malaysia is probably the best place, cost-wise, to raise a family and also have the best quality. I think Kuala Lumpur is fantastic for that. Now, the last suggestion I have is Argentina, or Buenos Aires in particular. And I don't really have like a huge reason to suggest this. I haven't even really been there, but I just hear so many good things about it. It's kind of hard not to recommend it. I think one of the big reasons as well is that, because I'm from Sydney, our biggest problem is our cost of living crisis, and it mainly comes in the form of rent or like the cost of houses. And I remember looking at like just being curious and looking at like the rent of like places in Buenos Aires, and they were so cheap. Like, I remember looking at this place, and it was like a 4-bedroom penthouse, like downtown Buenos Aires. It looked like a luxury place, and it was for like 900 USD a month. I guess it's not including electricity, stuff like that, but it was just so beautiful. And even though I have no interest in moving to South America, like I would want to go just so I could stay in such a luxurious penthouse for like 900 USD. Like, it's just like, I don't know when I would have the opportunity to be able to sustainably stay in a place like that for more than a little while without breaking the bank. But yeah, I couldn't imagine just that being my life. All of a sudden, you just get to move to another country, and all of a sudden it's like you're rich. You get to live like a millionaire. If I was to do that in Australia, oh my gosh, it would be over for me if I did that for a month, right? But you can live a really luxurious life in Argentina. You don't necessarily have to be super rich by your own standards of whatever that is in Australia or America. But if your main concern is rent, like it is for most Australians, then yeah, I mean, just go tease yourself a bit. Go to like real estate, type in Argentina on Google, and just see what you can get, and you'll be astonished. And after seething for a little bit, you might decide, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to deal with this problem head on, and I'm just going to move to Argentina. I'm going to learn Spanish, and I'm going to do that. Now, I'm just going to end this video on just a few points that I wanted to mention, which I think would be just kind of interesting to note. So I mentioned how you could teach English. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, which I've done a number of times, is you move to a new country and you do long-term rent on a place that has at least 2 bedrooms in there. And it's going to cost like a bit of money up front because, usually if you move to a new place, you're usually doing short-term stuff. So if you're going to pay long-term, there's a bit of money up front, but it'll be cheaper. Now, the reason why I recommend this is because then you can put that spare room on Airbnb, and depending on where you are, you can make some good money off it. All the suggestions that I've given you so far, these are all these are like very touristy hotspots. And in fact, if you decide that you don't even want to live in a city, you want to live like in a more touristy place, like in the Philippines, there's places called like Malbaol, Surigao, Palawan. These are some tourist places, right? Just as a recommendation, right? If you would actually go rent like a 2-bedroom place, you can put the spare bedroom on Airbnb, and you can dramatically reduce the cost of your rent, or you can actually completely negate the cost of rent entirely. So when I was living in the Caribbean, that's what I did. I basically lived rent-free because I had someone that went from being an Airbnb guest to staying long-term, and then I didn't have to pay rent. And if you've got even more rooms, like if you're able to afford getting a 3-bedroom house, then you can actually make money from it, and it can be a real business. And you can do this anywhere. I mean, it's more ideal to do this in like more touristy spots, but I'm sure you could do this for a lot of places that are on this list. Another thing that I want to mention as well is that, a big complaint that I get when I recommend this to people, or if you talk about like moving to another country, to others, you get like this very closed-minded response, which is like, that goes along the line of, yeah, sure, things are getting worse in my own country, but like things are way worse in other countries. There is like this belief, like if you just lived in the first world, it's almost impossible to believe that the third world isn't just this absolutely tragic place where even the dirt is cannibalizing each other. It's just, just madness, and there's just blood on the streets, and there's just swollen bellies, and, flies flying around kids' faces all day, and it's just, you touch a toilet seat, you get AIDS. Don't be so close-minded about it. It's not that bad. The third world is generally picking up. But the other thing is that even if you were moving to Africa, what I wanted to say is that, like, you've got to accept, you just got to internalize the reality is that our first world societies are in serious decline. And I know a number of you who, if you were watching this video and you're part of that demographic that admits that he's broke, he has no opportunities going forward, no social mobility within this, this period of his life, that I know you're probably eating like 2-minute noodles more than you should. You're probably already in some kind of micronutritional deficit. If you don't get fruit soon, you're probably going to get scurvy. So your personal existence perhaps is already like not so different to a third world one. It's just different. Like, you might think it's different because you walk outside and you see beautiful infrastructure, but as soon as you go inside, it's back to 2-minute noodles and like timing your showers, right? So you might as well just cut out the act and just move to a third world country. Just get it over with. It's like you're already living a third world life. Why not just move to a third world country? Because the difference is, at least in a third world country, at least you've got more utility. There's more things you can do. Because if it's cheaper, as I mentioned, you can do more things. You can have a better life, because you can spend more money on things that you want to do. Or you can use that saved money to have more time, which will allow you to further yourself in life. But if you remain in this society that you're currently at, you just can't get further ahead because your time is being robbed from you, and you're going to just be forced more and more to be exposed to the decline of our society, and things are only going to get worse. So that's why I recommend, if your only option is to move to some third world country, then you should just do it. I would even recommend just go to Africa. I don't care if it's dangerous. If you're living like in some downtown, like metropolitan city, like London or Canada, like who's to say that London isn't going to become as dangerous as like Africa, so you might as well just get to it. And the other thing as well, like the last thing I want to mention is that there's a big problem of purposelessness with young people in our society. And a big part of that is that if you're in a first world country and things are good, generally speaking, like infrastructure wise, you go outside, like things that just work, there's, uncracked pathways and roads, and there's shops, and everything that you need to live is there. In a way, that's kind of not good if you're a young person, because you're trying to find your niche. You're trying to find the way in which you can contribute to society so you can get paid for it and so you can get recognized for it. You need to feel useful. And if you're in a society that where everything's already kind of set out, the garbage trucks come on time, the buses come on time, you've got trains, you've got landscape gardeners coming to trim people's hedges, you've got everything you need. It's kind of hard as a young person to fit in unless you're some kind of super genius. Like if you're a super genius, then you can go get specialized in some area and create like the next microchip for some big company, right? That's where you can fit in. And I think everyone who's young is being made to be hyper specialized in an area, because that's the only way in which you can make some kind of valid contribution to society. It's hard to make a valid contribution if you decide to just become some regular run-of-the-mill wagey. So what's good about if you move to some other country, particularly a third world country, is all around you, you're going to see chaos, right? And not all the chaos is bad, but part of the point I'm trying to make is that you might find that it's easier to find some kind of niche that has like a lower barrier for entry than it would in your own country, right? Like just having someone that does like I don't know, look around you and you see shops, right? And outside the shops, they've got signs, right? Like if you want to create like a shop that, you know, prints signs, I know it's kind of a bit of a trite point, you probably wouldn't be able to do that in your city because they're everywhere, right? Like go do that in the Philippines. There's probably not as many, right? You could go do that. There's just more things. I don't know. I don't know if that point was kind of lost on you, but the point is that there are more opportunities for you to fill in because things haven't matured yet, that the society hasn't matured yet, right? You have the opportunity to contribute to that because there's just a little more chaos in the environment. I think when you're young, you're trying to seek the frontier, the next frontier, right? A frontier that has some chaos that you can provide some order to. You can provide some value for that arena, make some money, and receive recognition for it. And you can do that in other countries. And the other thing about you in particular, yes, you listening to this video, is that you probably don't feel that unique or special because in your own country, there's just a number of people like you and perhaps even better than you. But when you go to some other country, there's just fewer people like you, and that will increase your value in many different ways. So when you go overseas, you're going to feel like there's just a little more to you. There's a little more you can offer. You have a little more value to people. People look at you a certain way. And this is just going to be apparent, like, for instance, in the dating world, there's just fewer people that look like you look exotic. Girls just like things they haven't seen before, right? So that'll apply in a lot of different respects, right? So that's a really big reason why I think you should just leave in general. Regardless of my recommendations, just go anywhere. I think you should just get out of wherever you are. And yeah, so guys, thanks a lot for watching my video. I'll see you later.